How are we doing this morning? Chase is doing good. Sounds like the rest of you are doing pretty well too. Is there any part of your life could be better? Yeah. I saw Casey's eyes light up. She is making a list down here. I'm sorry, guys, if she brings this list to you. The answer is no, Casey. That's what you're going. No, not the answer you were going to give, but that's what you're going to get. No. Yeah. Well, sometimes that answer, "How you doing?" It's good. That's polite, right? Then other times it means mostly good. One of my favorite phrases that I've stole from. Now his mind just jumped out of. I can't even give him credit. The finance guy that approaches things from a biblical standpoint. I think it is Dave Ramsey. Yeah, Dave Ramsey. Better than I deserve, right? Sometimes that's his common response. How you doing? Better than I deserve. I love that response because, man, that sums my life up no matter where I am. Better than I deserve. But then there's this question that we have. Is there anything in your life that could be better? And Casey, I'm sorry. I just saw your face. You reacted. I love it. I appreciate it. But you reacted, and there was this whole list, right? And the next question that normally comes to mind is, why isn't it better? Now, tell me if I'm wrong, Casey. Most of those things you had in your mind, you were thinking about how other people could make your life better. Am I right? You hadn't got that deep into thought yet.
Not really. I was thinking more of track-wise and how I'm in a lot of pain.
Yeah. Casey had a track meet this weekend. She came in and she said, "I'm sore." I said, "Good." That means you ran hard yesterday, right? Yeah. So you're thinking about self-improvement, right? And I know Casey well enough to know this isn't going to be the best example of where I go first. The next question is, why isn't it better? Right? Now, normally, the list we like to make is lists for how everyone else could make my life better. Now, when it comes to track, Casey, I'd say you're working at making those things better, aren't you? Is that an easy process?
No.
Does it feel good?
No, because I'm not allowed to run in order to make my life feel better.
Oh, yeah, because you've been dealing with shin splints. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now it's really difficult, isn't it? Yeah. And so some of this is outside your control, isn't it? And when we ask that question, normally we think of what everyone else could be doing to make us better. But I'm reading a book right now that I'll reference just a little bit here in the beginning called Extreme Ownership. And the concept is written from 2 Navy SEALs. And the concept is this outrageous idea that, we have written on so many pages of our Bibles. Do something different, right? You can't blame it on anyone else. Extreme ownership means I own it. What am I going to do to make this different? Right? And there are things outside of our control. That we have Christ to more than fill the gap, to empower us to make things different. But one of the mechanisms that we use in our lives when we know something should be better is to blame it on someone else. At school, it's the maintenance man. It's the supervisor, right? He never gets any flack. At work, it's our coworker or our boss or the manager. Someone doesn't know what they're doing, right? It's not my fault. But then there is, down in the deep hidden crevices of my mind, these places where I know I should be better. I ask, why is it not better? We're going to talk today about hesitation for renovation. And man, there are some legitimate reasons, Ernie, amen, for hesitating to renovate. If I couldn't get an amen out of you on this topic, I'll never get it, right? Yeah. I mean, there are some legitimate reasons to hesitate to bring about renovation. They are real. Both in physical structures, right? And even more so in my life. Andy read for us from Exodus, the 5th chapter. Now, the people are in Egypt here for good reason. There was a good reason for them to go to Egypt, wasn't there? They were going to die where they were. And through Joseph going through all the difficulties he went through in his life, and think about that for a moment, God is renovating the Abraham's family, we'll say it that way. God is renovating Abram's family, but think of all the inconveniences and hardships that have to be a part of that. I mean, Joseph goes through some real garbage and has no idea why. Now, God's told him there's something better coming. But there is no correlation in Joseph's life between even his parents bowing down and serving him and being thrown in a well by his own brethren. There's absolutely zero correlation to being a king and being falsely accused by the person you faithfully served, Potiphar's wife. There is no correlation between life being better and being forgotten in prison. But it was all part of the story. And when the people come, Abraham's family, come to Egypt, they are treated like kings. And Joseph realizes, after the fact, I think, that his brethren bow down to him. And after he has this teary-eyed reunion with them, he realizes it was all part of renovation. It's all part of renovation. But now, what in the world does that have to do with the fact that we are in slavery? Exodus, the 5th chapter. And there is no longer a Pharaoh who remembers Joseph. There is no longer a Pharaoh who remembers what I've done good. Have you ever felt that way? People tend to be awful quick to forget what you've done for them, don't they? But not me. I wouldn't make that mistake. Not you. I mean, you wouldn't make that mistake. It's just everyone else. Everyone does it to us, right? And so what's any of this have to do with where we're at now? As slaves in Egypt. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the slaves in Egypt longed for a better life? Do you remember how this chapter how this book starts out? There rose a Pharaoh who remembered not Joseph. And then what do we go into? We go into the very story that tells about our children being slaughtered. Can you imagine being in a situation where our children are dying and still being unwilling to make any change? Did they long for a better life? Absolutely. In fact, we read that God heard their cries. He saw their affliction. He saw their suffering. Let me ask you this. At any point in the history that follows, does this people step into the future that God has them destined for? Not a one. Well, excuse me. I was dead wrong. I've got a helper here. I was still right. Not one. Two. Right? Yeah. Two of all those people that come out of Egypt step into what God had planned for them. Why? Is it that they enjoyed slavery? They enjoyed their children being slaughtered before them? No. No. It's because renovation is a miserable, miserable process. That's true in my life. And I'm certain it's true in your life. We're going to kind of use this story of the Israelites as a backdrop, but we're going to look at some more specific examples in the New Testament today. Is our primary focus is going to be renovating our own lives. Before we do that, we are going to pause for that timeline, that storyline rather, for a moment and recognize the difficulty of collective renovation in our lives. So as we go through the principles of personal renovation, we can be mindful of the challenges that face us collectively. Now, we saw that yesterday, huh? Did you do that for me, Kevin? I'm just going to rely on you, Kevin. Okay. Oh, but you know what, Kevin? I'm going to jump back and forth, and I'm just going to steal this from you. So I don't know if you all, thank you, you're a good man, and your clicker works too. So I don't know if you all caught on to this, but a few weeks ago I said that we were going to look at this series, Faith for Real, and I put this before you and said, here's our outline. This is how it all ties together. And it may have seemed to you like we departed from that for the last 2 weeks, because I addressed the concept of Palm Sunday when our nation, so much of the world, pauses to recognize that date. And so I dealt with that. And you may have thought, well, he forgot about what he said he was going to do. And then last week is we paused and contemplated Easter. You may have said, well, he's completely abandoned that. But to the contrary, if you look here, the idea we're looking at in this series is how faith is real. How faith really impacts your life. Now, so I didn't go back, I didn't emphasize this concept of series, but if you remember when we talked about the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, we talked about how it wasn't like anyone expected. In the real life outcomes, are you seeing it? The real life outcomes of faith are completely different than what we may have anticipated. And yet, they are better. As Jesus entered Jerusalem, they expected a triumphant king, not a man hanging on a cross, but yet 2,000 years later, we understand that what Jesus did is far superior to any physical kingdom. And so we talked about real life outcomes. And then last week, we talked about the non-norm. And yes, I made that word up. The non-norm, the rule of exception. The fact that because Jesus did not remain dead like everyone else in the world remains dead, we have confidence that we don't have to accept the norm. I said I was not normal. That wasn't a revelation to anyone here, right? But the fact of the matter is we as Christians are not normal. And so we've actually dealt with two of these topics in the last 2 weeks, and today we move on to the hesitation for renovation. Now, I've noted how difficult that is, and let me ask you, why would you not want to go from the picture on the left to the picture on the right? Anyone? I mean, does anyone say that's not improvement? But Ernie, you know what's coming in that top right corner, don't you? A lot of work. This is why you don't want to go to that bottom right corner. Am I on the right vein here, Pace? Yeah. And, you know, it's so much easier to tear out all that old stuff, isn't it? And then you put up, if you're like me, and you don't get rescued for a little while by the Glinkerman brothers, you end up with months of dust everywhere and all kinds of, like, your clothes down in the basement. And wait, sounds like I'm getting a little off on personal experiences, doesn't it? And there's all this difficulty. Now, I want you to think about Exodus 5. Did you catch that? God met Moses in the wilderness, and he says, listen, Moses, I'm going to send you down, and I am going to have you deliver my people. Moses says, but they're not going to listen to me. I think he starts first with, I can't speak. He said, I'll give you Aaron. But why would they listen to me? Why would Pharaoh listen to me? Why all these things? And God says, go down there. I've got control of this. And Moses and Aaron go down there and they say, listen. They don't even say give them up forever. He says, Pharaoh, let my people go to the wilderness for 3 days, I believe, in sacrifice. And Pharaoh says, listen, you guys have way too much time on your hands. So I want you to do all the work you were doing before with no straw. And the people come to Pharaoh and they said, how do you expect us? It's impossible. We were working ourselves nearly to death and now you have tripled our work. He says, you guys had enough time to get together and send these 2 men to my house to give me a hard time. I'm making some modifications here for understanding, Tom. And so apparently you've got enough time to get your own straw. And what Andy read for us from the latter part of Exodus, the 5th chapter, is when Moses and Aaron come out from meeting Pharaoh, the leaders of Israel are standing there waiting for them. Says, we need to talk, right? You came here and you said you were going to help us, and you've made us stink in the eyes of Pharaoh. And made their soldiers pick their swords up to slay us. Now you judge for yourself if what you have done is right. And I think we can all say, I understand where they're coming from. Now I don't think we do that enough. Because what do? We go to the end of the story and say, well, don't you know? Amanda was pregnant with Christian. When we Amanda and I dove into debt way over our heads. She quit her job and we started 2 businesses simultaneously. And everyone said we were crazy, and I think they were almost right. We were probably dumber than crazy, but we had a little bit crazy mixed in with it. In the next 8 years of my life, I held on by a mere thread. And I thought to myself one time, man, if I could go back and tell myself anything, I'd say, Mike, you're going to make it. And I would have loved that comfort, Pam. But you know what I think the truth is? I don't think I'd have made it if I was certain I was going to make it. Because 4 a.m. comes around awful close when 12 a.m. was bedtime. Right? When your body's hurting and you've got all these problems. And I think we need to pause when we read the biblical context and say, those Israelites didn't know they were going to make it. What they know is this man showed up, made a bunch of promises, and now our situation, which was already horrific, is worse. And so I think we can say, wow, I understand where they're coming from. Did you notice this? Chapter 6. It's just not the people with this mindset. He says, actually, the very last verse of chapter 5, Moses goes to God. And Moses says, you sent me down here, and now look at what's going on, and no one's saved. Chapter 6 is God's response. He says, fasten your seatbelt, Moses. You're about to see things you've never envisioned. But as we think about the process that follows, did it get easy all of a sudden? You know, God tells these people, I'm going to bear you on eagle's wings. And we can read through the book of Exodus. And we can say, man, those wings are bumpy wings. The renovating process is difficult. We're going to spend the majority of our time talking about a personal level. But I think it would be a terrible disservice to not address the difficulties of corporate renovation. The church has been in steady decline since 1979. There is more about this building that's different today than the boy, were they ugly, but man, were they great. Ugly blue seats with those armrests where I could shield my eyes from Terry, from Mom, and she didn't even know I was sleeping. But brethren, God knows when we're sleeping. God knows. And those awesome theater seats won't even hide it. One of my motivating drives in my entire adult life has been to impact that equation. And here's why. I don't believe it's God's will. Everything I read says otherwise. I've had some experiences. I've thought and prayed about sharing these, but I think at some point being real and open is the only way we get to the bottom of some things. When Amanda and I started at Blairsville, our attendance on Sunday morning was sub 10. And everyone said, boy, this congregation used to be a thriving congregation. Boy, I wish we could be back to where we used to be. And now I know that's a problem. Now I know that when we are looking to go back, we are in trouble. Because we can't go back, no matter what. What I thought I was hearing is we want to grow and we want to bring souls to Jesus. And that's different than I want to go back. Because 8 years later, when I was forced to resign because we had worked 90 plus hours a week. Remember I told you, I dove in over my head, and the next 8 years of my life I held on by a thread. Those were the same 8 years that I preached at Blairsville. And when I resigned, there was right around 40 people in regular attendance. And I cried like a baby because I did not feel that I had done a single good thing. In many regards, I had not. I'd been hearing a statement for about the last year and a half that just shocked me. But I didn't understand how much I was going to hear that in the years to come. Those 10 people that were originally there, not all of them, but on a regular basis, I was hearing the same statement. This just isn't the same little church that it was 7, 8 years ago. And I thought, surely this is an isolated situation. Surely we don't know what we are saying. There were a number of years that I did not preach. In fact, for the next year and a half to 2 years, I wasn't very active because I was recovering. In that time, another good friend and I, neither of us preaching, he came to me. He said, Mike, it's time you wake up. It's time you get to work. So we worked together and we came up with some ideas. We pitched an idea in a business meeting, and the individuals in the business meeting, of which widely are all from one demographic. And I'll explain why that's significant in a moment. It's not that there's anything wrong with any generation or any demographic. But when we at a church serve any select group, we're in trouble. They said there'd be no interest in that. I said, would you mind if I, with your permission, if I asked around, see if there's interest? So go ahead, but we know there'll be no interest in it. I came back the following month with right around 60% the congregation interested in. So we did it. And what followed was amazing to me. I had people showing up at Blairsville and getting in my vehicle with me and traveling with me to where we were worshiping. We had families and things were changing. And people who had never been there before were there. And you know what was said? What we're doing is not traditional. And so we are going to go back to what's traditional. With some discussion, it was decided instead to take a survey of the congregation. Over 70% of the congregation said, "This is amazing. We need to continue." In the very next meeting, it was decided to do what was traditional. Without using numbers, because the details of knowing where and what take from the message, not add. That congregation stands at less than a quarter of what it did just a few years ago. Where I went next, I was told, man, we've got to address, there's no kids here. There's no kids here. And what I heard next was, do you know the mess that these kids are making in the bathrooms? Would someone please get a hold of that woman and tell her to correct her kids? That particular case, I said, did you know those aren't her children? Did you know her daughter's incarcerated? And she doesn't dare touch those kids? Or that's the end of her impact? You see, the problem is we never get to know them. We see our inconveniences when we ought to see people's struggles. And the next thing that's said is Amanda takes 2 pews of kids and sits down with them. Is they're taking advantage of your wife? What people should be saying is, can I help? There are souls that need Jesus. And our social groups don't matter. And the emotion that's pouring out is not anger at this congregation, because it's the opposite. But it's important, brethren. It's important. Souls are on the line, and they aren't always the souls that we think they are. The image of God is on the line. And you know, there may be a time when there are no peeps and there are, man, unfortunately our kids are quiet today and I'm to blame for that. There may be a time when we don't hear babies. There may be a time when our little toddlers aren't throwing toys down the pews and down the aisles. And there may be a time when one doesn't slip out of the aisleway and come running up here with me and disrupt all the things that we think we're doing. But those are the exact things that we're supposed to be doing. You know, you guys were live streaming here before I ever got here, and praise be to this congregation, because through personal wisdom or the providence of God, you were ahead of the times. You know, church doesn't look like it did just 3 years ago. And our live streaming is amazing. And I ask the question, is our purpose to share Jesus? Because folks, those of you, when I say folks, I don't mean you. You folks, I say it because I can't look you in the eye. So many of you couldn't be here with us. Can't, and beyond that, there are other reasons that I don't know. I'm just grateful. You have the opportunity to worship your Heavenly Father. And I pray that you're growing closer to Jesus. And I know these technologies help us to do that. That's all I know. I also know it doesn't look like anything like what we've done in the past. It wasn't needed in the past. It wasn't available in the past. Renovation's hard. It is inconvenient. It's dirty. It's dirty. But there's things that are better than the things of this world. And when I say better, please hear me. I'm not saying better than the past. I'm not saying better than anyone else has done. I'm saying better than I am, better than we are, better than what we have known. But can you imagine saying, I want to go back? Can't be done. It just can't be done. It's interesting to me, and I apologize, I did not intentionally lie to you. But personal renovation is so important, I'm not going to just squeeze through it in a couple of minutes. Is that a good car?
Back in the day, it wasn't the greatest, but it was okay for economical reasons. It was a 62 Ford Falcon.
Oh, you're so close. You are so close. And it's probably the same. It's a 1960 Ford Falcon, according to the image I took it from. That's amazing. Oh, my. And he said, back in the day, it was an all right car. Here's the thing. Without renovation, without improvements, does that car look like that today? You can't keep that thing on the road, can you? But even if you could, that would not be... Mike, did that car have air conditioning?
No.
How about power steering?
No.
Was it standard?
3 on the tree.
3 on the tree. Wow. I was going to ask who here knows how to drive a standard, because that's a generational thing, mostly. Yeah, see, already. And there, you know, a lot of anyone any younger than me, and even my generation doesn't know how to drive a stick. But I've never driven a 3 on a tree. I mean, the standards I know aren't like that, right? Imagine. Then there's nostalgia to that, right? And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's not our aim, is it? This you can tell, and you know, sometimes being real doesn't fall out like we have planned. That's been the case for me this morning. You know, this is huge for us, isn't it? Renovation. I would like to bring our attention to the fact that we have a shortage of resources. And we're blessed here with money, right? We're able to do things we wouldn't be able to do. I don't know, how many of you pay attention to these numbers, but the budget's $1,900 a week. That's not the norm. It's great, right? But 3/4 of what we do, we couldn't do if we didn't have people in the past who have made generous donations, right? Those aren't the resources we're short of, because those resources will run out. They're not infinite. What about reaching out? What about impacting the next generation? What about doing all the things that are available to actually let people know we care? The merger that we're working on is not so much about doubling. Figures I would pick the week after Easter, the pointed A numbers, right? So we're not looking at doubling that number, but we're looking at, we should be somewhere between 80 to 90 people on Sunday mornings. Is that our goal? No. Our goal is to work together. So we've got more renovation problems. That's the goal, because that's not growth. Can you imagine the renovation they're going through? Some of them may be with us this morning. I encourage you to get to know them as much as you can. And open that topic up. Ask them what they're going through to do what they are doing. It's incredible. We talked about things, and I'll end with this idea because it will be a good place to leave. Kevin's going to run through these slides, and this is going to be his clicker. But the elders in particular at Roseville, we talked about a lot of things when we first started talking about the merger, one of which was, we want to honor both sides. Do we consider a name change? One idea that was given was Summer Rose. And here was the response to that from the elders at Roseville. We do this, we're one body. And there's no differentiation. We are one. We are one in Christ. We are one in name. And we're one in purpose. That's a difficult renovation. But you know what? The power of this message is what lies. You could run through those real quick if you would, Kevin. Is in personal renovation. You see, that's what Christianity is about. God doesn't want you to change. God doesn't want you to make small renovations or small changes or improvements to your life. He wants you to be something completely different. And so these renovations I've spent time addressing this morning, they're small compared to what Jesus is laying at your feet, saying, let's tear it to the ground and let's build it anew to be mine. If anyone else is in charge of the renovations in your life than Jesus, if he has not consumed you and brought you to the very end of who you are so you can begin to be who he calls you to be. If that's not the case, make those changes today so that you can be his. You can be great. If we can help you with any spiritual need, please come forward as together we stand.